So are we.
Yay, woo! So we're talking about, I always am mindful that the concepts that we throw out sometimes are so jargony. And tonight to me is like one of those. We're talking about repairing a argument or repairing a conflict in relationships. And I was asking Debbie, how many people do you think actually talk in that kind of language? Honey, I think we need to repair the conflict we just had. I don't know that we use that term, but it makes sense, right? It absolutely makes sense, doesn't it?
It does.
Repair. Think about a car breaks down, right? What do? You bring it to be repaired. It's the same thing. A relationship breaks down, you need to repair it, Of course, we need to do maintenance, but we're not talking about maintenance tonight. We're talking about actually when the car breaks down, when the relationship breaks down, we need to figure out how to repair it. We need to bring it back to homeostasis where it's running smoothly, where we feel good in the car, where we feel good in the relationship.
Didn't we say I was going to open tonight?
Did we?
Yeah.
Okay. I think we did.
About 2 seconds ago.
Okay. Well, why don't you...
I was laughing.
So why don't you jump into some of the preconditions about making a repair? We talked a little bit about that.
Right. Well, I just want to talk about repair in general.
Okay.
Because I think this is such an important concept because as Craig said, we don't even think about it. We get into a relationship, we get into conflict, we say, oh shit, this was like the perfect relationship and now we're fighting. Like, I really didn't think that was going to happen in this relationship. And then we fight and then somehow we recover and we go back to normal. And then all of a sudden it's like, oh shit, here it is again, the same argument. Why does this keep happening? Maybe I'm in the wrong relationship.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe this person's just not meant for me. But this has happened over and over. I just keep getting into this, a situation where I think that relationship is great and then it's not. And that's why the concept of repair is so important. And it's important to learn. We're excited to be able to kind of scrape the surface of it.
Mm-hmm.
And it's important because we just don't learn the skills. Like, I think that we should learn these skills in school, but we don't. And so what is repair? As Craig said, it's the relationship is in harmony, and then it goes to a state of disharmony, and then it goes to a state, ideally, of repair, and then back to harmony. So repairing is just basically bringing it back into harmony. And the reason that repair is so cool is because it not only goes back to where it was, but it actually goes back to a state that's better than it was. Because the reason we got into a state of disharmony is because we were triggered, things going wrong, and the repair process itself allows us to really learn about what triggered me, how did I respond, how do I want to respond in the future,
Right.
And it creates more connection rather than just shoving it under the carpet and waiting until it comes out. Like, there it is again.
Right.
But with the repair process, it allows us to really learn about what are our triggers, what are your triggers, and how in the future can we come together in a more meaningful way. And that actually fuels the whole healing process, which is why we're in a relationship anyhow.
Right, exactly. Yeah, one of my favorite quotes is by one of my teachers, conflict is growth waiting to happen. And I do believe that every conflict that we have is an opportunity, as Debbie, as you're saying, to build trust, to build intimacy. I know when we think of conflict, we don't normally think of intimacy. But the fact is that if you're able to work through a conflict, an argument, a disagreement, and come back into that state of repair and harmony, that says to your partner, wow, this guy this girl has some really good skills. I can trust him. I know we can get back into connection again. I know this doesn't mean that we're just going to, as Debbie said, sweep it under the carpet, the proverbial sweep it under the carpet. We all know what happens with the carpet when we keep sweeping it under the carpet. In relationship language, we would call that the resentment keeps building and building and building.
But you asked a really important question, and that was, what are the precursors? What's the mindset to make repair happen? And I would say the biggest thing that happens, and there's several things we can talk about, but the most important is you got to want to. And you got to know that I want to repair this ugly, ugly conversation that we've had, this conflict. And the reason is because I realize that the disruption that's created between the two of us disrupted the connection and the love that we have. And I care so much about you that I want to restore it. And, you know, so often we lose sight of that want to, that desire. And what replaces it is our egos. I'm right, you're wrong. And I'm just not moving off of that little spot, you know, and we find it in our relationship, it happens. And, you know, just because we have some skills, we always remember that I care more about you than I care about being right. And it's that old saying, you can be right or you can be in a relationship. Sometimes you can't have both.
We're talking also about this idea of being right. I'm right, you're wrong. You know, it brings up something that we've been studying together actually through a teacher of ours, this idea of that we have a functional adult on board in our minds. We have this functional adult. And we have this sort of immature child. What does he refer to the child as? An adaptive child. So we have these two parts inside of us. And typically when we get into a conflict, an argument, where our adaptive child comes on board instead of our functional adult. And when you have two adaptive childs on board arguing with each other, it's very, very hard to do a repair. It's nearly impossible. Because basically you're telling me you're upset, and I'm telling you, well, I'm upset. You think you're upset. Let me tell you who's really upset here. I'm upset, you know, and you're getting into this sort of back and forth about who's right and who's wrong. So, it's
important.
So I think it's important to describe what the child looks like. What are you laughing at?
Well, no, I think I was just.
She's grabbing my notes. She hates when I use notes. I have notes down here.
Okay, so the reason that this concept of child adult is so important is because, as Craig said, we both end up on our child. And we're pointing the finger, we're blaming, we're excessively describing our position, and we're putting each other down. We're saying things like you always, you never, and we're just acting like children. It just happens, right? And the key, one of the key things to remember, and this is so important, is that if you want to create any possibility for connection, and you don't want to go down the rabbit hole, one of the rules in fighting is both of you can't be in your adaptive child at the same time. One of you can be, but when you see the other, so if I see Craig going, well, you always and you never and you know, then I have to remember to stay in my adult, because he's sunk down to his child, and there has to be an adult in the room. And so simply just remembering that creates some protection in going down that rabbit hole. And that's been really important for us. So I always have to be staying in my adult. Just the way it goes. But anyhow, actually, that's not true. What's true is he has to stay in his adult, because I probably go down. I probably go into my child more often. But it's adorable.
We're getting better at having both adults show up, you know, and then really being able to have a very mature, kind of an evolved conversation where we work through it. Just remember, I mean, the main reason you're having an argument, generally speaking, is because you have two different opposing, generally speaking, perspectives. And for whatever reason, I can't accept yours.
So tonight we're going to talk about a few ways. I think we have 8. You can check your notes for this. Ways of interrupting the pattern of disruption. Because what happens is once we start going, we're going down that little rabbit hole. And the best way to stop it is to stop it. But how do you stop it? You have to stop the momentum. And I refer to that as a pattern interrupt. We have to interrupt the pattern of sinking down. So we have a few ways, and we're going to go through those quickly. And then we're going to talk about, so those are ways of stopping it before it gets too blown out of proportion. And they can happen like that. You can interrupt that pattern and then you're laughing, everything's fine. But sometimes you don't. Sometimes you're on something, and Crick and I are going to share a conversation that we had that got more serious. And then you have to have a conversation about it. and we'll walk you through the steps of that conversation.
Yeah, so just to paraphrase, and we'd love to hear from you too. Just to paraphrase what Debbie just said is there's two conflicts, right? There's two repairs, I'm sorry. There's the repair of when you're in the middle of a conflict and you're having an argument and you want to stop it right then and there and you want to repair it right while you're in the argument. And then there's the repair that happens after you've had a long argument and you're both upset and it didn't go anywhere, it was bad, and you walk away from each other. And now you have to come back and repair it.
Right.
So like return to each other,
Right.
return to that connection. So we're going to show you both, and we can talk about both.
Yeah, I would say the pattern interrupt is not necessarily a repair. It's interrupting it, like it's going downhill, and I'm just changing the energy.
Right, you're changing.
And some of it is restorative, for
Right.
sure. But I don't know if I would consider it as a repair.
Okay. Restore.
Yeah, it's a restore thing.
It's a return.
Right. So let's
Okay.
go through them and see.
So just one last thing. These arguments that we have,
Mhm.
and we're trying to do a pattern interrupt, the reason we don't normally do them naturally is, and you probably noticed this in your own relationship, you tend to argue over the same things in the same way. We call it your cycle, your negative cycle in EFT language. Sometimes they refer to it as your dance. And it's the dance steps you always tend to go to when you're having an argument. So the idea of a pattern interrupt is really to change the way you're typically doing your argument. And it's hard because you really have to think about it. Okay, I'm going to do something different this time. So here are some of the things that we were reading about. One, why don't you go through them?
Okay, so so the first one is to offer a compliment or affection. So it may be that Craig's coming at me and he's just getting really annoying.
Yeah.
And because he's annoyed, right? And instead of getting annoyed, I might just say, you know what? You look so handsome tonight. You just look like my little stud muffin. Look at you.
What was I made at you about? I forgot.
Exactly. So what we're doing, we're just changing the energy. He's on a rampage, and if I could just touch him and just say, you are adorable.
Right.
I love you. That he may be still sitting on his complaint, but 100% it's going to slow down the negative energy.
Right.
And create more connection.
Yeah.
So that's one.
Another one is agreeing with the person versus disagreeing with the person. So let's say we were having an argument. We were having one the other day about Debbie not following up with clients quickly enough. You know, clients will leave a referral, and I'm like, did you follow up? Did you follow up? You know?
So go ahead and do that, and I'll show what that looks like.
So did you follow up on the referral that you got this
No,
morning?
I didn't.
What do you mean you didn't follow up?
I know I didn't follow up.
It's so important
it's
that
so
you
important.
do it. Yeah, right away.
Oh my God, I can't believe. Thanks for, you're right. You're absolutely right. Thanks for the reminder. I'm getting on it right now.
She agreed with me.
I'm agreeing.
I'm right.
It's not exactly
And
how that one went down. I can just tell you that. But okay. But that's
Okay.
how it would be done.
Another one is compromise,
Okay.
right? That's a good one. You can just compromise. Another one is stepping back and describing the conflict that you're having.
Right. So that's important because what this is when you catch yourself in your cycle. We've been through this before. Okay, so this is what's happening. You know, you're really upset that I didn't do it, and I'm getting defensive, and we're in that negative cycle again. You putting expectations on me resisting you, and here we are again.
Here we are again.
So by calling it out, it takes you out. You can see how it just takes you out of that cycle. Just by saying, whoa, look what we're doing. Not pretty, but we're in there again.
My favorite, again, we're talking in the middle of an argument, is having a signal that you both agree upon. That is a signal to that we're going, can you stop? Can we stop this argument? It's getting a little too much for me. But the idea here is to have a playful signal, something that's a little bit humorous. So, for example, Debbie will stomp her feet when she's getting angry. She'll go, I don't know if you can see me. She goes, you know, and I'm like, it's hysterical, but it stops the momentum. It is a pattern interrupt.
Right. I do it like I'm 5 years old.
Yeah. She gets really.
I'm so mad at you. And he looks at me like I'm 5 years old.
But like you can have a word, you know, you can make up a word when you're in the middle and you want to kind of stop it. You can make up a word like flugelaga. you know, whatever.
Or,
Flugelhager.
you know, another one that that I often tell clients is like, just find like a numbskull. Like sometimes I'll call
Numbskull.
Craig, like you're such a numbskull, and it's just a funny word. So or you're nincompoop or whatever it is.
Right.
But when you do that, you want to keep the energy light and fun. And I was doing some therapy with a client, and we had to go from Zoom to FaceTime. So the one guy, and he's in his office, she's at home, and he's really good with the computer. So he had emojis, and all of a sudden he was like a bear. And he's talking to his wife like this. Well, I really want to redress this conflict that we had yesterday. And she's cracking up, and then she puts a face on, and now they're talking to each other like this. And I said, this is perfect, you guys. This is exactly what we're talking about, is keeping it light. So he went out the next day, and he says, I think we've stumbled on a new form of therapy for you.
Yeah.
I said, well, it's keeping it light. Anything you do to keep it light. So the next time we had a session, he said, show Debbie. He had this big panda face, and he put it on. And he said, this is for when we get into arguments. And I said, so have you used it? And they said, no, we haven't had to. Just seeing it there is enough to disrupt the energy.
I had a colleague who taught me to get Groucho Marx glasses, you know, the big nose and the hairy, big glasses with bushy eyebrows. And I would put it in my pocket. And every time we would get in an argument, I'd pull them out and I'd put it on. It's very hard to argue with somebody wearing a pair of Groucho Marx glasses. So I highly recommend you all get a pair of Groucho Marx glasses.
Or whatever cracks you up, you know, it could be anything, really. You know, when I was teaching in organizations, we were teaching basically the same concept. So when something goes wrong, you just don't want to create that negative energy. So we called it an uh-oh squad. And we got these big red noses.
Yeah.
We'd have 3 people put them on at the same time, and we'd go, and we'd stop our phone, we'd go, uh-oh, uh-oh, uh-oh. And that basically meant that there was a breakdown someplace.
Right.
And it was maybe a pretty serious breakdown, and we would call in the uh-oh squad. It just cracked people up, and it lightened up the energy.
Any questions, Sarah?
Just a comment.
Mm-hmm.
That maybe you can address from Stephen. It seems like there's an oversimplification of conflict. It may not be adaptive child against adaptive child. That implies a competition. My experience is more adult to adult. It seems like there's 2 kinds of conflict itself.
Yeah. Well, adult to adult is a great conversation to be having. So if it is adult to adult, then there wouldn't be a breakdown necessarily. You're just having a very mature, evolved conversation. You may not be hearing what you want to hear, but you're at least able to have the conversation without it resorting to anger or frustration. And the other thing to be careful of, although Debbie and I were talking beforehand about, is sometimes we may be in a parent-child kind of dynamic where we're patronizing or subtly controlling or talking down to somebody, demanding something, or telling them the way it is, you know. So
it feels like an adult, but it's really not.
It feels like an adult because
according
it's a
to our
parent.
definition of it.
Yeah. I'm not saying that's what's happening, but we just want to be careful that we don't slip into that.
So adult to adult, you're listening, you're repeating, you're mirroring, and you're really in a very highly functional state, which is what we want to do. Question.
Another question here. What if the attempt to keep things light just makes one person feel they are not being taken seriously?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So the humor thing is good to change the energy, but we have to obviously be sensitive. And, you know, you just have to read the room, as my daughter Shana would say when I walk in and I ask her a question and it's not wanted. Tells me to read the room. You have to be sensitive. You have to know and learn. And so if I said something to Craig that was light, and I said, I don't know, what could I say that was light and playful? Whatever it was. And you said to me, you know, you're just not taking me seriously. Then if I was in my functional adult, I would say, I'm sorry, I was just trying to lighten things up. Tell me what's important.
Right.
So I would just slip right back and meeting him where he is, which is, I'm serious, I've got a serious concern, and this lightness that you're trying to do is not helping. And I would just meet him at that level.
Right.
Okay, I'm putting my nose aside. or whatever it is.
Yeah.
But you gotta know each other. And the more time you spend, the more you know what's going to fly and what's not going to fly.
Right. So just a couple more of these pattern interrupts when you're in the middle of an argument. You could request to stop. We need to take a break and just make that decision that you need some time, but you got to make a decision to come back when you're going to come back. You can't just walk away. I need 10 minutes. I just need to cool off. I'll be back. Can we meet again in 10 minutes? Another one is get vulnerable. Meet with softer emotions. Typically, when we're upset, we're in frustration or anger. Drop down just beneath, I promise you, just beneath your anger and your frustration is either hurt, sadness, or fear. So drop, if you can, it's hard, but if you can, drop down into those emotions. And then Debbie likes, she called it a shit-filled Twinkie. I don't know what that is exactly, but I lost my appetite for Twinkies. So what is that?
No, I would never tell somebody to do a shit-filled Twinkie. It was kind of a play on it, but it's when we say something nice, like, you are such an amazing guy, and I want to tell you, there's something that I want to tell you though, and that what I want to tell you is A, B, and C. But remember, you're such an amazing guy. And we used to call that in organizations when I was working a shit-filled Twinkie. And it's shit-filled because it's like, you're telling me something, but I know you're telling me just because you're trying to soften it up. Why don't you just get right to it? So it's kind of like something you don't want to do, because it feels manipulative.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
So, okay, so that is,
Oh, there's
go
a
ahead, we have another question. Love the questions. Please interrupt us.
What do you do if one partner seems satisfied with sweeping it under the rug while the other person wants to work it out?
That's a great question.
So important. We see that all the time.
Yeah, because usually in relationships, excuse me, my nose itches. Usually in relationships, you have what we call a pursuer and a withdrawer. And the withdrawer is going to be less comfortable having that conversation. And that's typically why we call them withdrawers. They're not as in touch with their emotions, and they don't want to really sometimes even access them. Let's shove things under the carpet and move on. Would you say that's the case?
Yeah, they're typically having a hard time expressing their needs and their wants.
Right.
So it's easier not to talk about those things than it is to talk about them. Okay. So yeah, I mean, when you have somebody like that, the only way to kind of work with that is to be really, really sensitive to that disposition and to kind of create a safe space. Because think of it this way, think of a turtle and a hailstorm. So the withdrawer is like a turtle. And what happens when things get loud and thundery, they pull into their shell. Hailstorms tend to be louder, tend to be more emotional, tend to be more enthusiastic in an argument. And so we have to tone that down in order to let the turtle feel more safe coming out of its shell so it can stick its head out and make sure everything's safe out here and okay. And then we have to give the turtle a lot of space to talk about what they want to talk about. So no interruptions, no disconnection, no cutting them off in the middle of a sentence. It's really about, for withdrawers, giving them a space to express their needs and their wants, because they typically won't.
I think that, in sessions when I see an extreme case, and I'm assuming, let's just take the most extreme case where somebody, I might have, and a lot of times it's the woman, but not always, and she'll sit quietly and you ask her what's going on, and she just, it's like this and really doesn't want to talk and doesn't have access to it. What I find helps the most in those situations is to create a lot of structure around the conversation. Mm-hmm. So I'll say something like, okay, so let's do this. We're going to ask one question to both of you. And I want both of you to get little, what do you call those things? Clipboards. Mm-hmm. And you're going to privately write down the answer to the question. You could even draw a picture, whatever comes to mind. And maybe it's not a complete sentence, maybe just a word. Mm-hmm. And then we're going to share that. And so I'm taking baby steps to have a conversation, to pull out whatever they can, wherever comfortable pulling out. And so I'll just keep taking these baby steps, and eventually they do open.
That's a good lead into the next part of the conversation we want to have. We talked about how to make a repair when you're in the middle of an argument. Well, we also want to talk about how do you make a repair when you've already had a big argument and you're both angry and upset and you've kind of gone to your separate corners, and how do you come back? So, you know, there's a couple of game-changing rules that you have to start off with as you're beginning to make that kind of repair. So you want to mention a few of those?
Well, I mean, just basically, it's basically listening to each other.
Yeah.
Right? There's a structure, and we're going to go through it. You may want to take some notes, because they're, I think, really important steps to debrief what happened.
Right.
And we have a repair, a conflict that we were going to go through, right?
Yeah.
You want to just jump into that?
Okay, but I do want to say just a couple of things about this. First of all, like Debbie said, you want to be committed to making the repair, but you want to find the time to do that, because this doesn't take 5 minutes. So you really do need to set some time aside to do that. I think there are some ground rules. When you have a conversation and you want to repair, and you're both upset still, you're both still triggered, kind of you're both a bit in your child, right? So one of you has to be the adult. They can't have two children having this conversation. So you decide who's going to be the adult. Basically, the adult is the one who's setting their ego off to the side and is going to probably listen first, okay? You want to look at each other, you want to face each other, you want to turn your phones off, and you want to really get ready. And one person speaks and one person listens, okay? And so we are going to have should we have an argument? Should we just show the correct way, or should we show both ways? What do you think?
Well, we can,
We'll do the incorrect way very quickly, because we don't want to trigger you all. So it's a little bit intense. We don't want to have a real argument, but this was a kind of a real argument. So
okay, so we're going to just show.
So what happened was, okay, so Debbie's going to be the child probably, and I'll be the but I'm not being the adult. I'm being I'm being the parent. So this is not a child.
Mastered that.
So
go ahead.
You know, you said you were going to order the bed frame, okay? Mm-hmm. You know, I ordered the bed. We need the bed frame.
Yeah, you told me
yesterday. I want them to come around the same time unless you come.
They're going to come. They're going to come.
Well, you say that, but I
told you yesterday they were going to come. You asked me, and I said it is going to come.
Well, I'm not arguing that it's going to come. I'm arguing when it's going to come.
I don't know. I spent a lot of time with Sarah. We looked at it. Hey, Sarah, we spent hours on this thing, and I would really appreciate if you back off.
All right, can I just give you my perspective? All right, just for a second, okay? Look, you know, when I am at work, okay, I delegate to my employees.
Oh yeah, you delegate, all right.
I delegate to my employees, and when I give them something to do, I expect it to get done.
I am not your employee. I am your wife. And you know what? Now that you've brought it up, you delegate a lot.
Yeah.
And it's just really, really annoying. He gave it to me. I've got it. Please go away.
Okay. Well, you guys get the picture. We had a rough. This was kind of how it went. And I know where all that stuff in me comes from. You know, my father and all that stuff. I'm not going to go into it. Steve, you know Jack Lambert. You knew what I grew up with. So anyway, now we're going to do it correctly. Okay, and I want you guys to look for some of the things we're doing that are really, really important in having this kind of a conversation.
On how to do it correctly.
Okay, so this is what we're going to do. As the speaker, and Debbie's going to be the speaker, I think. She's going to say, this is what happened. She's just going to describe what happened in the argument. This is the story she made up. In other words, what was her perspective, how she felt, what she needed that she didn't get, and what she learned about herself, and one way that she can make it better next time. So those are the 5 things as the speaker that she went. Now, I'm the listener, right?
Okay.
So before she goes on, I want to tell you what I'm going to be doing as a listener. That's really important.
Okay, so I'm
going to tell them what I'm doing as a listener.
Okay, John.
Okay? Hang on. First of all, I'm not going to cut her off. I'm not going to interrupt. That sounds a lot easier than it is, okay? I'm going to respond with generosity. I'm going to put my ego off to the side, and I am going to try to connect with her subjective experience. Okay, I'm going to try to understand her perspective, put myself in her shoes. I'm going to give validation and empathy. So look for those things, okay? Go ahead.
I forgot what the argument was about. Okay, so this is what happened. You had asked me to look for a bed frame, and I spent a lot of time doing that. And then you came in, and what I felt you were doing was just nagging me over it. The story that I made up about this.
Well, let me make sure I get that. So you felt like
excuse me.
You felt like I had come into the room and really started nagging you about this.
Yeah.
You had every intention to do this.
Right. And the story I made up about that was he's a nag. He can't help himself. I've told him about this before. He's not listening to me now. And it's more important for him to control the situation than to listen to me.
So you felt like I was, again,
excuse me,
nagging you, that I wasn't really understanding. I was trying to be controlling and control the situation. You didn't feel listened to.
I didn't feel listened to.
Okay, got it.
Yeah. And how I felt was annoyed, frustrated, and a little bit sad that here I am with you again in the situation of not feeling heard. Excuse me.
Don't cry. It's okay. No, I do want you to cry. No, please cry. So you felt sad.
I felt sad, annoyed, and frustrated.
Annoyed and frustrated.
Right.
And what were you, you were feeling sad, annoyed, and frustrated. What were you feeling sad about?
Sad that we've had this argument over and over again,
mm-hmm.
this type of dynamic,
mm-hmm.
and sad that we haven't surpassed it. That our relationship hasn't been able to go beyond it.
So you're feeling sad that we haven't been able to get beyond this argument. It's like a repeating.
It's a repeating thing.
Situation.
And that went from sad to annoying and frustrating.
Right.
So what I need in the future is for you to just really, like, at the first sign of, like, this has happened before, is to really try and pivot off, like, listen to me, like, I've got this. Maybe I can just say, I've got this.
Mm-hmm.
And when I say I've got this, if you could back off.
Yeah.
So I don't have to say back off.
Right.
I can just say, I got this.
So it's like one of those signs when you said got this, you just want me to kind of back off, don't worry.
And I'll do,
so much.
I can do, I've got this in a really nice way.
Yeah.
Like, even though I'm starting to get annoyed already, I can just say, you know what, honey, I've got this.
So you need me to really respect when you say back off, I've got this.
No, I don't want to say back off. I'm just going to say, honey, I'm going to do it in a really, really nice way. Honey, I've got this.
So you're going to do it in a nice way.
Yeah.
Okay.
But I need you to just stop there.
Stop there. Just be quiet.
Yeah.
Move away from the situation.
What wouldn't work so well is if I said, honey, I've got this, and you say, well, I just want to make sure you've got this.
Yeah.
Like, that would just be starting the loop over again.
So it's really about trusting you that you've got it.
Yeah, that's kind of the end of the conversation, that I really got it. Okay. And what I learned about myself is that I'll fight you. Like, when you get into that mode, when you get into that parent controlling mode, I get into this, like, child mode. Like, just leave me alone. Just go. I'm just fighting you. You know, rather than taking action to stop you in a more adult way.
Okay.
And I see that, and I can feel the resistance.
Right.
I can feel the anger towards you. I'm fighting you. I'm right. You're wrong.
Right.
You shouldn't be bothering me.
Yeah.
You're bothering me. Here you are being Jack again, rather than being more loving.
Gotcha. Okay. So.
And one way I can make it better next time, I think, is to connect with you in a more loving way.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll do that by saying, honey, I've got this.
Okay.
You say one more word, you're dead. I think that would work for me.
Yeah. So that was, if anybody wants to put in the chat room what they maybe saw me doing, that was a corrective experience, a repair, because I could have easily defaulted into a resistance mode, a defensive mode. I could have got critical again. I could have gone right back, because that's what happens, right? We go right back into that, what we call that negative cycle of doing it the way we always did it. And I can be with a couple in therapy, teaching them this, and right in front of my eyes, they'll go right back into it, and they'll do exactly what they do in their living room, in my office. And I'm like, wait, guys.
Wait a second. Is this what happens at home? Okay, let's do it differently here.
But it's not easy, because it's a pattern, it's a habit. And it's not just a habit we've had with our partner. It's probably a habit we've had our whole lives, So you just have to really work at this. Now, ideally, if we had more time, Debbie would then allow me to talk to her as the speaker about what my experience was, and go through that format, what I noticed, what's the story I told myself, how I felt, what I needed. And then you have a real dialogue. It's not just a monologue.
And it could be that what I said to him could have satisfied all that. And if that did, if my solution of just saying, honey, I've got this, would satiate his needs, and he's done at that point, you don't have to go through it.
Right.
But if not, then, you go through the next person. Yeah.
The structure of this is really critical. And I just want to say that this is obviously not how we communicate normally. So I understand that. But we have to break the pattern of how we communicate normally. So we need a new structure. And this is a really helpful tool. It can be fluid, but you do want to follow the steps. And if anybody's interested,
we can send those to you. If anybody wants, just email us and we'll give you all of it. So we have a comment and a question. So the comment first.
Yeah, from Carlos and Carol. Hi, guys. I think there's a lot of power in trying to put yourself in the other person's shoes. That seems to soften things and allow for more possibilities in a repair situation.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's it in a nutshell. Is really having the ability. And when we do that, we're coming from an adult, and we have to step out of our child or our parent. So it's a powerful move.
Very powerful. Yeah. Exactly. You got it. You hit the nail on the head.
So we've got actually two questions. First one, what if one person is interested, but the other person isn't? Can a conflict be repaired if they're not interested in creating this kind of structure?
If one person is interested and the other one isn't.
This would be the whole Abraham kind of work. Is like, okay, so one of the things the child will say when we're having a child-child argument is, I can only be happy if you fill in the blank, if you have this repair with me. That's the only way I'm going to be happy. So, I know we're not all these evolved beings, but if we were, what would that look like? One of the ways that would manifest is it wouldn't matter whether they're having that conversation with me, because I would be whole, I would be happy, I would be content within myself. And I don't need my partner to show up a certain way. Now, you may decide at the end of the day that you don't want to be with that type of a partner who can't have that conversation with you. Or there may be enough good things in this relationship that you can overlook that part, that they can't have this or they won't have this conversation with you. So it's really a personal choice at that point.
Yeah, I think it's, again, baby steps. It's like it's like the woman who can't talk up in therapy because she doesn't have a voice. And I would, if that was really important to me to have that conversation, and it is really, it's important.
It's a very important conversation.
I would work in baby steps to get my partner at least closer than not having it at all.
What would a baby step be, for example?
A baby step would be, could we talk about that conflict we had? Now I want to talk about it. Okay. Is it okay if maybe I just talk a little bit about where I am with it? No, I don't want to hear about that. Okay. Can I write you a note? I mean, I would think about like how we could create connection where it disrupted.
Another way, I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
Another way to do this, which is really interesting. So John Gottman came up with this idea of having a stress reducing conversation. So one way to do this is to take the relationship out of it and just get some practice with helping your partner just talk about something they're going through. A stressor at work, maybe something that they're dealing with that they haven't shared with you, and just give them the space to do that, mirror that, reflect back what you're hearing, and just that will get them in the habit of being a little bit more open, and then maybe move to something that's stressful in the relationship.
Yeah. Okay, question.
So back to the scenario that you role played. What if Craig continues to see that Debbie is not following through with what she says she will handle? Just curious, how then would you approach the dilemma?
Yeah. You know, this is also one of choose your battles too. You know, I mean, you have to prioritize. Now, if this was very important to me, and most things aren't, if you think about it, if you think of the big picture, okay, is it really worth having an argument? So I do a quick cost benefit analysis and I try to determine whether it's going to be worth it, because you know what the outcome is going to be. It's not good.
No, but we talked about, you know, with this particular situation, we talked about, you know, why don't you just give me a deadline?
Yeah.
And then you can, so then you've got a boundary that works for you.
Right.
So you could have just said, I really want you to work on that bed frame. And is there any way that maybe you can have some options for us to look at by Friday?
Right.
And then we have something to work.
That's
then
true.
It's like, Friday, back off.
Right,
Sweetheart, back off.
Sure.
So that would probably work.
Yeah, that's another good suggestion. As it turns out, with something like this, you know, I can be very controlling. So I have to look at my own need to control the situation, you know, and I can be very patronizing and talk down to, and contempt is one of the worst things you can have in a relationship, where you're talking down to somebody, like, you know, and they don't know, or you're better than they are. So all these dynamics that play out just because I want to get it done, you know, how important is it really? So you have to assess that. Ideally, Debbie would have heard me out and would have understood my perspective. And so, like I said, what just happened earlier would have been a dialogue. So I would have had an opportunity as well.
How are we doing on time?
7:44.
Okay, so we have a minute. So wrap up by saying that there are a lot of ways that you can repair the disconnection that happens from a conflict. And it doesn't matter what you do. The more important point is that you have an intention to restore the conflict. And I've seen couples do
restore the relationship.
Restore the connection. And I've seen couples do like really, really creative, innovative things. And they don't even have to have the list. They just do it naturally when they want to do it.
Mm-hmm.
When I just really don't want the two of us to be disconnected because of some stupid argument, and I want to restore that, we get really creative in how to do that. And so tonight we just shared with you some ideas, and we're more than happy to email you the ones that we came up with. And just know that there's really no wrong way to do this. When your intention is, I care about this person, I want to reconnect, I want to make our relationship even stronger by understanding what happened and how we can do it differently next time.
Yeah.
So thanks for joining us.
Thank you for joining us, everyone.
We love having you here with us. I wish I could see who was there. You're just like little teeny specks to me. But thanks again.
Anybody have anything they want to share before we end?
We can open up the lines, the audio.
Yeah, if anyone wants to unmute, they can certainly do
Oh.
so.
Feel free to, if you want to unmute and give anybody feedback or give some feedback to the group. You know, it's just so beautiful to have you as a community. So thank you, and we're excited to continue this as long as it's helpful.
Yeah, I think.
Thank you, Craig and Debbie.
My pleasure.
Thank you guys.
Thank you.
You know, we started this because of COVID, and we recognized there was probably a need to have some dialogue, some information about how to stay and create a healthy, stay in and create an even healthier relationship. And like, what else do we have to do? You know, we're stuck at home. And so part of what we're realizing is I think a lot of people are really zoomed out. I mean, there's so many opportunities and so many different situations out there that we can gain information from. And so we're evaluating, like, how long do we do this as everything opens and we get our lives back. Craig and I are talking about, like, what does that look like? And for me personally, one of the things I've realized is that I'm not sure I want my life back the way it was. Like, I realized that I spent a lot of time running around and doing things that weren't really necessary. That took me away from just being at home and enjoying it. Took me away from cooking and creating new things in the house that give me satisfaction. And I don't want to go back to the busyness that I had before. And so I don't know where people are going to land and what they're going to desire, but our intention is to be here to add value. And if it turns out that there's still a need for that as we open up, then we're going to stay and we'll continue doing this. And if there's not, then we'll transition to something else that may be more beneficial. So we'd love to hear from you. And again, we're here until as long as it makes sense. But we do really, really appreciate you showing up every week and participating. And thank you. Thank you for being here.
Have a good night.
This has been great, most informative.